Center Conference Room at 351 West Center. George, before we ask you to say a prayer, we would like to take a moment and acknowledge the incident of last Saturday as we lost one of our finest, Officer Chief Joseph Shiners. And we will have a moment of silence for him tonight. We remember his family in our prayers as we begin today. And we'd also like to thank all of our officers and firemen for the work that they do every doggone day, because they put their lives on the line for us. We're grateful to them. And other people that are actually in danger's way too, that we don't acknowledge very often either. I see Travis here and think of the linemen that are up on those poles. And things that we appreciate all the hard work that people do. We'd invite George to sit on the prayer.
Our dear Father, which art in heaven, we, as a city council, bow our heads this morning and this afternoon in humble gratitude for our many blessings. We're grateful for this great city, the city of Provo, Utah, and its leadership. Bless us as the city council and administration that we might do the things that thou would have us do to build a beautiful city for our citizens. We ask you to bless the family of the officer that was killed, that they might be blessed, Father. We love them. We're so grateful for the service of our public works and our safety departments and all of the departments in the city that do so much for the city. But public safety is the one that has the most difficult time in safety, and we appreciate so much their great service to the city of Provo. We ask for a blessing on this meeting that we might do again the things that thou would have us do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, George. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. Please be aware that microphones in the room pick up noise and paper and other rustling objects. Further be aware that microphones can pick up side conversations. We'll begin with the roll call. Beth?
Cliff Strachan. Brian Jones. Dave Sewell. Dave Knack.
Gay Naburon. Jerry Winterton.
David Harding.
Bryce Mumford.
George Stewart.
George Handley.
Mayor Kafusi.
Wayne Parker. Isaac Paxman.
Before we begin with the agenda, we'd like to remind those in attendance that although this is a public meeting, only presenters and those seated at the council table may speak or ask questions unless otherwise directed. We'll begin with item number 1, and that is a training on Open Public Meetings Act and further training on Government Records Access and Management Act. This will be presented, our annual discussion with Brian Jones.
Thank you, Chair Winterton, members of the council. Come up here.
I'm going to hit video link. It will turn the screen on.
Okay. Make sure this is on. So we've done this a number of times, and most of you are probably more familiar with it than you'd like to be, but we have by state law a requirement to go over the Open Meetings Act training each year. So let's see, this is, okay, here we go. So here's the Declaration of Public Policy in the statute. Legislature finds and declares that the state, its agencies, and political subdivisions exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. Therefore, it's the intent of the legislature that we take actions openly and conduct deliberations openly. So that is the intent of the statute. And there's a provision of the statute that says if a court is interpreting what the statute means, they're supposed to interpret it liberally to accomplish these purposes. So you do well to remember that. So who is subject to the Open Meetings Act? The short version for purposes of the municipal council is that you are a public body because you are created by statute and can expend public funds and have authority over public funds. So the bigger question is, what is a meeting? And there's a lot of text in here that's highlighted because there are a lot of terms that are defined in the statute. So a meeting is a convening of a public body, and convene is in fact defined in the statute, and means that the meeting is called to order by someone in authority to call the meeting to order. With a quorum present, it includes workshops and executive sessions. It doesn't matter whether it's held in person or by electronic communications. And the purpose of it is to discuss and receive comments from the public about something that you have jurisdiction over. So what does it not mean? It does not mean a chance meeting. If 4 of you happen to be at the grocery store at the same time, that's not a meeting. It's not a social meeting for like our Christmas party or other things like that. However, it specifically says in the statute that social meetings may not be organized for the purpose of circumventing the statute. So you can't have an extra party just in order to try to discuss business and avoid the Open Meetings Act. Electronic meetings, you can meet by electronic means if you meet these requirements. Notice requirements still apply. The public has to have a means to attend or participate, and you have to have an electronic meeting policy. We have one in our handbook that basically just provides means for if we are having a meeting here or down in the council chambers that members of the council can call in or join by electronic means so that they can be a part of the meeting. Probably the most important for our purposes, because we run into it the most, is a discussion about closed meetings. So this is a list of the reasons, and we've gone over these before, but just to review them. These are the reasons why a meeting can be closed. To discuss an individual's character, competence, or health. To discuss collective bargaining. To discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation. And to discuss, actually I'm going to skip this for 1 second because this one's the complicated one. Also deployment of security devices and personnel and investigative proceedings. But going back up to this one, this is probably our largest category. Purchase, exchange, lease, and sale of real property. And I just want to point out this is a little bit confusing. So these 2 bullet points apply to all of that. Purchase, exchange, lease, and sale. You can hold a closed meeting if a public discussion would disclose the value of the property and would compromise accomplishing the transaction on the best possible terms. If you don't meet one of those 2 categories, if you want to discuss purchasing property but you're not going to discuss the value of the property, or the details of the discussion wouldn't compromise your ability to accomplish the best terms, then it actually doesn't qualify for a closed meeting just because it's a purchase of property. Likewise, these 2 down here apply if you're talking about, only if you're talking about sale of property. If you're talking about sale of property, property has to have been previously noticed by the public body that it's available for sale, and the terms of the sale must be publicly disclosed before they are approved.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It seems to me, though, that if you're talking about purchasing property, even if you don't even know the price or anything like that, that if somebody hears about it, that could be very speculative. Oh, right. We're going to go do that. So isn't that still inappropriate?
Well, so that's this one right here. Preventing completion of the transaction on the best possible terms. If revealing that you're interested is going to lead to speculation, then that would prevent you from completing it on the best possible terms, because that's going to lead to the price going up. Right? So most of the time, a discussion of purchase of property is probably going to qualify for this, even if it doesn't discuss the value, because of that point that you're raising right there. The exception, I don't know if I can come up with a theoretical exception, but the exception might be if there was some piece of property that, for whatever reason, it's not actually on the market. Maybe the federal government owns it or something, and they're not interested in purchasing it. And so you can talk about it all you want, nobody's going to be able to buy it. If that situation kind of arose where you couldn't justify that talking about it would have an impact, then you wouldn't be able to have a closed session about it. And you'll recall with this last one that we in fact talked about, and we may need to follow up and make sure that this is happening, but we discussed, particularly with the RDA, the intent to put on their website a list of all their properties and announce that they were for sale so that we'll always meet this provision. And I don't know, Isaac, do you have any idea whether that's happened or not?
Sorry, you'd have to ask it again.
Okay. We talked, and hesitate to put you on the spot, because I don't even know, I don't remember if you were in that meeting, but there was a previous meeting, closed meeting about an RDA property, where we discussed this concept of putting all of their properties on a website as available for sale, so that this requirement would always be met. And I just don't know whether we've done that or not. So that may be something we need to follow up on in RDA Executive Committee or something like that. So, in order to close a meeting, a quorum has to be present. 2/3 of the body has to vote to close the meeting. There first has to be a public meeting that is properly noticed before entering into the closed meeting. And you have to disclose these things: the vote for or against, the reasons for holding, and the location of the closed meeting. And you may not approve an ordinance or a contract or appointment inside a closed meeting. You may not interview a person to fill an elected position or midterm vacancy, and you may not take final actions. We've discussed this before, that you actually can vote in a closed meeting if the vote is on, yeah, we vote that you go investigate that more, right? Or we vote that you come back and report to us. You just can't take a final action in a closed meeting. And notice requirements for all meetings: it must be posted at the location where the meeting will be held, must be published in at least one local newspaper, must be posted to the Utah Public Notice website, and all that has to happen at least 24 hours prior and include those things that are listed there.
Brian?
Yes.
One more thing before
Yeah.
we leave closed meetings. Tell me about how important it is to keep content confidential in a closed meeting. Thank you.
Well, let me go on, because I'm going to get to that when I talk about what minutes and recordings have to be. So I'll hold that question for just 1 minute. So as to not have to come back to this slide, there is a provision in the code for emergency meetings with less than 24 hours notice. The requirement is just that the best notice practicable must be given. So, and you have to demonstrate, you have to have a statement in the minutes that indicates why it's an emergency. And you have to make an attempt to notify all the members of the council.
Question.
Yes?
So, based on past experience, what's your opinion of someone besides the secretary taking notes of the meeting, private notes? And then one beyond that, in the many years past, we had a council member disclose that they had actually taken in a tape recording without anyone knowing and recorded the meeting.
Are you talking specifically about a closed meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to answer that with the question that Gary asked just a second, which I think is on my next slide. So for all meetings, for all open meetings, you must keep written minutes and a recording. For closed meetings, you only need to keep a recording, and you may keep detailed written minutes if you want to. However, there's a specific exception where for deployment of security personnel or meetings to discuss the character and competence of an individual, you may choose not to even record the meeting if you want to. But if you do that, there needs to be a written statement, a sworn statement signed by the presiding officer indicating that you've chosen not to do that, and that needs to be included in our records. Okay, so now to this issue about availability. Let's see. Well, in fact, okay. I'm going to skip forward to answer these questions that are being asked. So, here's what the statute says about violations of the Open Meetings Act. A member of the public body who intentionally violates the closed meeting provisions of this chapter is guilty of a Class B misdemeanor. So if we close a meeting that we're not supposed to, and we do it intentionally, that could apply. It could also apply to these situations that you've asked about, where under the terms of the Government Records Access and Management Act, the records of a closed meeting are protected records belonging to the city and distributable only at the will of the city. So if you were to disclose, if you were to intentionally disclose information from a closed meeting that was unauthorized, it's arguable, at least, that you could be in violation of this provision right here. Now, there's nothing specifically in the statute, to your specific question, there's nothing specifically in the statute that says you can't take notes, or even that you There's nothing that specifically says you couldn't make a recording for your own personal recollection. The problem would be if you distributed that. Okay?
Now, if you did turn off the recording because it was not going to be recorded by the city, it would probably be inappropriate for anyone else to record it.
Right, I think certainly. And generally speaking, I would advise against it, because you could potentially find yourself in violation for intentionally making the recording but unintentionally distributing it, if that makes sense. So I don't know that I would probably advise against it if I was asked, but there's nothing specifically in the statute that talks about that. Let's go back then to this. This is really for Amanda. Amanda knows all this stuff by heart, but written minutes have to be available within a reasonable time. Pending minutes within 30 days, final minutes within 3 days of approval. Pending written minutes have to be identified as awaiting approval. We have to have procedures for the approval of written minutes, which we do, and recordings of open meetings must be available to the public for listening within 3 business days. And I think, Amanda, I think this has actually been updated to, in addition to just being available, it has to be posted on the public notice website. Is that right? Within those 3 days. Here's what the minutes must include. All meetings must include date, time, place of meeting, and the names of all the members that are present or absent. Open meetings must also include votes, names of people that are providing testimony, additional information, substance of everything discussed. Now, there is a relatively new change, just as of a couple years ago, that if the minutes include links to publicly available online videos, you don't have to do this in textual format in the minutes. These items right here with the footnotes. And recordings of closed minutes also need to include the names of everyone present, except that if including the name of someone present would disclose what the meeting was about, then you can keep that person off of the records. We've had a couple instances where that's happened in the past. We talked about violations already, and here are, according to, I can't remember now where I got this, I've adapted this, but I can't remember where the base one came from. But
just real quickly, we were talking about violations of the closed meeting portion, but you could also violate the Open Meetings Act by meeting and not
without proper notice,
without proper notice,
right? Or calling an emergency meeting when it's not actually justified, or leaving things out of your minutes, or all of those things would constitute a violation. But again, notice that it's only an intentional violation that is subject to criminal penalty, but even an accidental violation could result in an action taken by the council being voided. So last slide, common violations, closing meetings without the members first meeting in an open meeting and voting, conducting a closed meeting for unacceptable reasons, taking final action in a closed meeting, and failing to provide notice. I'm not aware of violations like those in Provo City in the years that I've been with the council, but I'm told that those are the kind of common violations that happen, hopefully always elsewhere. So any questions about the Open Meetings Act? And we had put on the agenda GRAMA. I hadn't actually really intended to talk about GRAMA. It ended up on the agenda because last year we talked about both because we had some new council members. But it's not actually an annual requirement to do GRAMA training. So I'm happy to answer any questions about GRAMA. But in summary, just recall that there is a huge list of reasons why the city can decide that a record is protected, and we can classify those records as protected at the time that we're reviewing them for release. It doesn't have to be when we create the record. And we have some procedures in place that we could review, but I think most of you are familiar with. When the council office gets a GRAMA request, a lot of times that's going to involve your emails. And so you've, I think, all had the experience before of needing to go back through your emails and provide emails to Elizabeth or council staff for review. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about that process if you have any.
So you were just saying that as they review information that's going to be released for GRAMA, they may determine at that point that something is protected that shouldn't be released, which highlights the difficulty and the expense when someone says, I want all the records from everybody forever.
Right, right. It's a huge expense, and I don't know if it's just because they don't like, the legislature doesn't like attorneys, but one of the provision in there even says that the time you spend on the legal review deciding whether the classification is appropriate or not is one of the things you can't charge for. So gathering the records and redacting the records you can charge for, but you can't charge for the time spent in legal review. And as you probably can guess, a couple of the GRAMA requests we've had in the last couple of years, we've had 2 or 3 attorneys down in the library, in the legal office for days, reviewing stacks of individual documents, trying to decide whether each email is permissible for release or not. So that can be a big deal. So, and you may have noticed sometimes, every once in a while, you'll probably notice that when I think about it in advance, I occasionally send you emails that say in big capital letters, protected record. And I do that when I know that it obviously falls into one of those classifications, to make it easier to identify later if that document was ever going to be reviewed. So, any other questions? Okay, that's all I had then.
Thank you. You do a great job on that every year. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Sorry you're subjected to it every year.
We will go to item number 2, discussion on recent changes to the Provo City Housing Authority, and we're welcome Robert Vernon here today.
I did not bring a PowerPoint or anything, so we'll just pass this out, which is our, I didn't do enough, I don't think. I'll get into the, so we'll have to see how many I actually have here.
We can share.
I do have a couple of extras.
Make sure Elizabeth gets one then.
So that's just a story. All right, so appreciate your asking me to be here. Love to talk about what we're working on and how we're trying to accomplish things. And start out first with the Housing Authority. As you know, the Housing Authority Board is appointed by the mayor, and the council confirms those appointments. We appreciate you recently doing that for 2 individuals. We would welcome George and hope to see you at our meeting next Wednesday. Be the first.
I haven't received any.
We'll send out notice here pretty quickly, and then Lynette Hemseth is our resident council member. So we have to have one of our residents on our board, and so our board is back at full strength. And just as you can look through this, I don't know if you're all aware who's on here, but Doug Gale has been an amazing member of the board. He is tremendously engaged in what we're doing and helps me at every turn with introductions, fundraising, whatever he can do. Doug has done a great job in that position as chairman. Jonathan Cow is currently on the board. He will be resigning at the end of our meeting on Wednesday, and he will be moving to the nonprofit board. So we will have another position open, and we will be recommending a person to fill that spot to Mayor Kafusi. And then Buddy Richards, longtime board member, provides great historical, economic, housing information to us from some of the studies he's done. Craig Carlisle keeps us out of trouble. Got to have those attorneys on there. Lauren works for Community Action and is, you know, provides input as far as community service providers. So great board of directors, very happy with what they're doing for us. So the Housing Authority, as it sits, has 883 vouchers, and we have 248 public housing units. That will never change. There will not be any more money for public housing. You know, our budget.
Vouchers a year, a month, a week?
What?
How many, those vouchers for what period of time?
Those are monthly vouchers.
You have 800 some odd monthly.
883
Monthly.
monthly.
How many
Yep.
units again?
248. And so, as far as the public housing, you know, we'll never get money to build more physical units. There are several programs at HUD that are trying to force housing authorities to convert their public housing physical units to vouchers. And so that is a program called the Rental Assistance Demonstration. That is something that we are in line for, but there's a process to go through for that. And you know, once we get in line, we actually have to do a physical needs assessment, and at that point we'll figure out if it's even financially feasible for us to go through that program. But it's something that we are looking at. In terms,
when you say there's no more money, does that mean the vouchers are going to be fixed at what they are, not more vouchers or no vouchers in the future? And why would you say there's no more money coming?
there's no, okay, let's separate out public housing first, physical units, 248 units. HUD is wanting to get out of the business of owning units, and so there will never be any more physical public housing units. And in fact, we may convert those to vouchers in the future by selling the units actually to a nonprofit and exchanging that with vouchers for the people that live there. So that's one side. On the voucher side is funded every year, just like public housing. We get operating subsidy and we get capital fund for public housing every year, just nothing to build new units with. We are locked in at 883 vouchers, and that will not change as far as I can tell. There are specialty vouchers that we can apply for. We have something called Shelter Plus Care, where we're able to help chronically homeless people. Our project that we just opened, where Skyline North Apartments, which the city is participating with us on, which we appreciate greatly. The old Amenity Inn has been rehabbed, and we have 30 units there. And most of the people living there are hard to house, chronically homeless people. And so that's kind of an amazing project. A lot of those people that were able to move in there had been on our waiting list for 3, 4, 5 years or more and had never been able to find a place to live. And they've been living on the streets and in their cars and things. And so, you know, that's an exciting project for us.
What's the location of that?
That is 40 West, 300 South. And we're also looking at doing the Travelers Inn, which is on the south side of 300 on the other side of University. And that will probably be February or March time frame if we decide to do that. We're currently evaluating what we've already done, and we've got a fair share of problems that we're not accustomed to because we haven't stepped into this market before. So it's kind of an interesting project for us, but I think it's extremely helpful for the city. Hopefully you feel that way, that we're you know, taking a blighted property and fixing it up. We're managing it well, and you know, turning it into an asset for the city.
Robert, those 883, are those nightly vouchers or are those
monthly?
They're monthly vouchers.
Yeah, so basically somebody comes to us, they go to a local landlord find a unit, and they come to us for assistance, and we give them a voucher which is for a year and extended as long as they're living there, and that's one of our 883 per month that we give out. So we have 883 people that, for 12 months, that get assistance.
Would they pay maybe some for 6 months and then?
There are a number of people that leave before the year for various reasons.
And travelers, is that a matter of, it's available if you want to go ahead?
It is. It is, and the owner is willing to put the money in to fix it up. It's really based on the amount of risk to us, because these people are hard to house. This is a market where we're not used to dealing with the problems that we're having on a daily basis. And so it is, you know, this is a labor of love, let me tell you. So, you know, I know the city appreciates it. We appreciate your partnership with us on that. And we'd love to do more. I think the Executive Inn is the same way. We could do that too and pick up another 30 rooms. But we want to do this slowly and make sure that we can handle it and that it works for us and for the city.
So you talked about picking up new ones, and maybe you just hinted at what the answer to the question is, but then you also said that you're not doing any more physical units. So if you say you go forward with Travelers Inn, how is that not public housing? Is that still vouchers? And
Okay, so we're using Shelter Plus Care vouchers to help pay the rent for, we're calling it Skyline North Apartments now. Skyline North Apartments, the actual project, is under Utah Regional Housing, which is our nonprofit.
Okay.
So the vouchers are being used from the Housing Authority side. And we've been able, because we got more money through the continuum of care, we were able to add some more Shelter Plus Care vouchers. So that 883 is a hard voucher number for our normal voucher market, but we also have additional vouchers if we can get additional money for specialty vouchers, family unification sometimes, the Shelter Plus Care. There's several other programs that are available that we currently don't have vouchers for.
Your program is so outstanding. I mean, are other cities doing this? I can't believe what we're doing.
What part? The vouchers and the public housing, or
public housing vouchers, specialty vouchers?
There are many that are doing that. Utah County is doing. They don't have any public housing units, but they have over 1,000 vouchers, and they have Shelter Plus Care vouchers too, and so they're working county-wide.
Are there other cities that have public housing units in Utah County, and who are they, and do they have very many?
No, not in Utah County.
That's what I thought.
So yes, Provo is stepped up in the 70s to meet this market and have done a great job in allowing the Housing Authority to get out there and build units and take care of a lot of the need in the city.
So even if the government kind of forces you to divest units, you can sell them to a nonprofit and really keep them doing what they're doing.
That is the goal. Excuse me. It is allowed to sell them to a for-profit entity, but those vouchers would be attached to it. So basically, what they're doing is they're trading public housing assistance for voucher assistance, but it would allow us to sell our public housing units to our nonprofit and fund those with vouchers from the public housing side. So, you know, it's it would be interesting if it's financially feasible. The problem is we have so many scattered site units, and this rental assistance demonstration works much better in high-rise or apartment complex scenarios where you're not so scattered. And so, you know, I'm not sure if it will work for us financially, but, you know, we're going to take a look at it and see what it will do. So that's kind of the background of the Housing Authority. And so what we're looking at over the years, you know, we had a great director who went out and did a bunch of tax credits and bought some properties and built up, some money in the discretionary side of our HUD entity, and then we have nonprofit that was started that some of those properties have been in. And so all of our future growth, everything we're able to do in the future in affordable housing to grow our portfolio will be done in the nonprofit. One of the things that happens when some of the nonprofit is under the Housing Authority umbrella, whenever it's audited, HUD has oversight, even though it's not their money, not their property, they still have oversight over that because it's under the HUD umbrella. And so what I've done is we bifurcated the two entities. So we have a separate board now for Utah Regional Housing, which is the old Provo Nonprofit Housing Development Corp., our original nonprofit. And so it's a standalone organization. So next year, when we do an audit for HUD, only the HUD properties and programs will be audited for HUD's purpose. The nonprofit is always going to be audited because as we develop properties, banks want audited financials, and you have to audit. So we'll always have all of our properties and our nonprofit organization audited. It'll just be separate completely from HUD. So that's basically why we split the two. And the board, as you can see from this other sheet on Utah Regional Housing, the way we set this up is that 2 of the board members would be appointed from the Housing Authority Board, and the other 3 would be independent. And so Kim Santiago, who was formerly on the Housing Authority Board, who was formerly a council member, she resigned from the Housing Authority, and she is on the nonprofit board. Doug Gale and Craig Carlisle are the 2 directors from the Housing Authority, and then David Gardner, who's a local developer, has been a great asset so far, is also a director. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Jonathan Cow wants to be on the nonprofit board, and so he is going to resign at our next meeting for the Housing Authority and will be appointed as the 5th board member to the nonprofit. The nonprofit can work countywide. We're not limited to Provo. In fact, the Housing Authority right now is not limited to Provo because we signed a interlocal agreement with Utah County so that we can work outside of Provo. And so we are looking for ways to develop affordable housing across the county, not specifically focused on Provo as far as the nonprofit is concerned.
Why to spread it out?
There's greater opportunity in the county. There's a lot more land available in other cities. The first thing that I heard from this board when I came in was that you didn't want any more tax credits located in certain areas where we already have a bunch. I was told you wanted home ownership instead of rental. So a lot of this is some of the direction that I've got in hearing what this council has given me direction to do. As I view it with the city, I would like to take out blighted properties that the city would like to see redeveloped. I think that's part of my mission. As far as developing, if the city doesn't want more tax credits downtown or in, close to the Front Runner. I sold a property down by Front Runner to another developer, a for-profit developer, because the direction I was getting from the council was that you don't want more tax credit low-income properties down there. And I'm a partner with the city. I want to do what, you know, what the city wants to have done. Yes?
I think the essence of this is, whether it's Provo or the county, is to have a diversity, a mix, to spread it out, to not have concentrations of poverty, or I suppose you could say concentrations of wealth to the point where it's so exclusive that no one else can live there. I mean, that's the Park City problem.
Right.
And so we do talk about inclusionary zoning, and we talk about land trusts, and the tools that we can use to provide the two things, affordable housing and then increase housing affordability.
Right. Yeah, and as far as the, so there's another entity that I'm sure some of you have heard about that we're starting that is currently under Utah Regional Housing, and that is the Utah Community Land Trust. The organizational document should be approved on Wednesday at our meeting, and that should be filed on the 17th. The nonprofit board put $1 million into that. I have another entity that I think is going to put $1 million in, so we'll have a couple of million to start with. And the whole focus of the Community Land Trust is focused on the housing that's affordable. So we're looking in that organization to be probably the sweet spot is 80 to 100% of area median income, so more workforce housing. Utah Regional Housing will be focused below 80% of area median income, and the Housing Authority is focused below 30% of area median income. Yes?
So if a developer, we have several at the moment that are talking about affordable housing and land trusts, or donating either money or dedicating units to be affordable. Of course, I think in that case it's actually 80% or less. But if a developer wanted to work with Provo City or some entity and say provide a portion of his project to be affordable, are you in a position, or will you be in a position to facilitate that so that we can make it happen?
Absolutely. That's exactly what the Community Land Trust is being set up to do. And you know, and frankly, my vision for that is, you know, I think it needs to be countywide, because if every city starts setting up their own parts of their city to do, you know, I mean, you have to vet people to do their income verifications, and then you've got years of compliance to make sure that they're complying, you know, with what they've agreed to comply with. And that's what the Community Land Trust is set up to do. I mean, that's our expertise, is, you know, is managing affordable housing and the individuals that are a part of that market. So the Community Land Trust you'll be hearing a lot more about. We have, we'll have a meeting on January 31st. Be sending out a flyer here fairly quickly, and it is specifically for council members to come and learn about the Community Land Trust. And then we're also doing a chamber breakfast on the 1st. We're sponsoring that.
Robert, where's that meeting going to be on the 31st?
I was waiting for confirmation, but I think it's going to be at the Hyatt, the new Hyatt. And you know, I'm getting a lot of interest. I mean, I've got meetings with Lehigh, Pleasant Grove, Eagle Mountain coming up. So we've got meetings that came out of our last training that we did for planning staff. I've gotten some really good feedback from that. And I've made a couple of requests of Provo too that you may not have heard of yet. But
so we have a number of agencies that work on housing.
Right.
there's habitat, there's rural housing, there's neighborhoods. How do you see going forward partnering or working with the other chodos?
Yeah, as far as chodos, I've chosen not to become a chodo, because if I become a chodo, I take money away from other chodos.
Right.
That's the first thing that I've done, because I think I can raise the money elsewhere, and I don't want to take money away from other organizations that need it. As far as a lot of the things that we would need to do in our business, as far as home ownership counseling and a lot of the things that some of the other agencies do, we would partner with them to do that. I don't need to do things that other people are doing. And probably the biggest thing that I see in Utah County, countywide, is that we're not bringing enough money here from the state. You know, the state has money through tax credits and through the Owing Walker Housing Fund, and we're not getting our fair share of money. And we really need to work on that. So what I would like to do inside the Community Land Trust is set up a development arm that's going to be acquiring land and putting tax credit applications together, and then I need partners to take those from me when we get them to that point and run with it. Because we can't do everything. I mean, we need partners, and there's some great agencies here in town with a lot of experience, and you know, I think if I can get accomplished what I want to, then everybody's going to be really happy about the amount of work that we can bring in.
So one last thing is, we are finalizing our affordable housing plans, and it seemed like in the past they weren't quite done correctly, and so they didn't get the passing grades so that we qualified for the Owing Walker Housing Fund. But hopefully we rectify that and we can have access to that money, because money is hard to come by.
Yeah. Did you get pre-scored on that? I know we talked about getting that to Robert Kutek and getting it pre-scored before you submitted it. Did you?
Did not.
Did not?
I didn't know that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Maybe ask where it is.
Okay. Well, and I would think that's something you could ask. If it doesn't score, well, you could redo it. I mean, I would think that's something you could revisit and change what needs to be changed.
We certainly want to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That money's available. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your feeling about the valley visioning process that's underway? It seems to me a really great opportunity to make sure that we have a comprehensive valley-wide approach to this problem rather than just, an isolated approach.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic that
I'm excited about that. Probably the biggest thing I'm excited about is that they're having all these individual meetings in the different cities, and I'm really hoping that the neighborhoods get engaged in that, because the more individuals in the cities can see the problem at that detail, that level of detail, they'll understand, where are we going to put 1 million people? You know, we can't keep building houses on quarter-acre lots. We can't. We don't have enough land. And so, we've got to make some decisions, and so I think that part of that is very valuable, because people are going to really see what the problem is, having to start thinking about, where do you put a strip mall? Where do you put an industrial center that brings this many jobs? Where is the next, mega center, like a Salt Lake, that's going to be somewhere down here south? That's got to happen. Where are the roads connecting the other side of the lake going to go? How is all that going to fit together? I think it's a great process. So I've been a part of that, and housing is definitely one of the three main focuses of that, and with transportation and the water, and so I'm excited about that project that they're doing.
This is the first time I've heard. I remember hearing about the shelter plus care vouchers and this effort to. It sounds like it's through Utah Regional Housing to purchase some of these structures and then use those vouchers. It seems maybe a year ago or so, we had a work meeting that focused on a lot of the service providers. And one of the things that really, a theme that really stood out to me was wraparound care. Does this qualify for wraparound care? Is this what wraparound care looks like that we have?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have an agreement with Wasatch Mental Health, and they are on site daily, and they would be at Travelers as well. So, yeah, you can't do this without having the services that are there constantly. And police presence. I mean, we've asked them to step up. We're having some problems right now with not people that live there, but people that come in and are basically camping in our smoking shed at nights. And so that's something we've asked the police to step up their presence over there, just to drive through and make sure that you know, there's not a lot of people that are there that aren't supposed to be there. And we were not able to purchase those properties. He would not sell them, but he master leased them to us. So we have a long-term lease on those.
So I appreciate you talking about the big picture, the planning, which frankly, the more cities that get into this and work together, hopefully we'll have a better outcome instead of everyone doing their own thing. Right. So one of the things you mentioned besides the jobs and the transportation was water. Mm-hmm. And I had someone this weekend, a friend of mine, call up and say, hey, what's wrong with my utility bill? And I have yet to see his utility bill, but he was claiming that he was using like $8 in water and paying $80 in sewer. And I think that's a little disproportionate. I'll have to see the bill, but the question does come up, though, as we get more and more mandates to treat our sewer and now our rainwater, our stormwater, that it's like, well, we can have cheap available water in theory, but it's not enough water. It's not the supply of water that's going to really be a problem. It's the expense of getting rid of it. We're treating it, yeah, which is just skyrocketing.
Yeah, that's something that needs to go to the state level. You know, the mandates coming down, and we've got another bill that's focused on housing that also is going to put some more restrictions on cities tied to your transportation funding. So that's another thing that you know, we're working on right now.
What is that bill? We're meeting with legislators.
I think it's SB 38, 34, SB 34.
Okay. I think that's one that the league has been working very cooperatively on, and so it's more of a, my characterization is it's more of a counter bill to some of the things that were proposed that were going to be very punitive or, you know, at least restrictive on cities. And so this is one that the cities have been very involved with, and it's definitely something to pay attention to. But I believe it's kind of a compromise bill, and I think the league feels pretty good about it.
It is definitely a compromise, but there's still, you know, some things in there that are going to affect your, you know, the general plan and the moderate housing plan.
So previously you indicated we could get a pre-score on our MIHR.
Yeah, I think.
Has that request been made?
I don't think it was. I think you guys approved it before we were able to submit it. So, but I'd be willing to help with that. So if we can figure out where you're at in the process and kind of talk to Robert and figure out if he's looked at it and what his thoughts are on it.
I've already emailed Brian. The deadline, as you probably are aware, was the 31st. We had to submit that, and we heard it the 11th. Yeah, we didn't. I didn't know it was an opportunity, and I don't know if Brian Maxfield knew it was an opportunity either. But we could reach out to Robert.
Yeah, you know, I talked about it at the one lunch that we had, but I don't remember who was there, but be happy to help with that.
Okay. and ask if, you know, if we didn't quite do something right, is there any way to fix it, or is it just, you know, too bad for you? It just seems sad that an oversight or not expressing something quite the right way, because we are doing everything and more to qualify, in my opinion.
That's one item that I've asked the committee to put in the bill, this new SB 34, that would give cities a chance that if there is something that they need to change to be able to qualify for the money, that there would be an opportunity to do that. Because I think that's a valid concern.
Robert, are you sensing that, because I am, that affordable housing is going to be the #1 topic this year?
You know, I get that sense, but then the first real survey that came out of the Valley Visioning showed that water was at the top of it, and I was shocked by that because, you know, all the conversations we've been having in the meetings, a lot revolved around the housing, and it's tied to transportation, and then to see that come out.
It seems like it's everything else is a moving part.
But yeah, as far as the discussions are going, I think affordable housing is a huge part of that, and I think with this commission at the state level, it's a 5-year commission. This is the first bill to come out, and I think it will continue to gain steam. And I think the cities that don't get on board with seriously considering affordable housing and how they're going to meet the need, they're going to pay a penalty in years to come. I just think that's where the legislature's headed. So, you know, that's with the Community Land Trust, that's where I want to get to. I want to get a couple of projects off the ground with cities immediately and show some progress that we can go back to the state and say, hey, you know, they're working with us, you know, we're making progress. So.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here, Robert. We look forward to working closely with you.
Thanks a lot.
We'll move now to item number 3, a review of council board and committee assignments, including a discussion regarding council intent accomplishments.
Council members, Robert, did you walk off with that?
It might have fallen.
I think it fell. It's by the front.
By the foot, yeah.
So last week, council members, we sent you an email reminding you that this is the last year of the term for 4 of you and the 3rd year of a term for 3 of you. And with in the context of the priorities that council passed in 2016 and 2016 updated in this last year in 2018, we wanted to present with you the various objectives and measures that you might consider as you move into this new year and think about what you would like to try to focus on this year in your various committees. Now, I'll also remind you that last week Elizabeth sent you an email that included the council committees and board assignments document. And with the change in leadership that we anticipate tonight, just to remind you to reach out to the new leadership and hopefully copy myself. Let us know what committees that you're interested in serving on. And one of the things we would ask from the staff level is that with your committees is to try and figure out how you want to focus those within the committees. So there's 4 priorities that we want to talk about. The 5th priority is that we won't talk about too much is General Plan and Vision 2050. And that's because last year after we updated the general plan, you passed those along with an assignment to the Planning Commission to do some of that work for you. So we haven't focused on that here. So we will talk about affordable housing, budgeting to priorities, economic development, and zoning compliance. So Next hour, the last item of the agenda for the work meeting today is affordable housing, and we'll talk about the resolution that you've been asked to consider. And in the course of that discussion, we'll talk to you about the various general plan elements that talk about, that relate to affordable housing in that context. And so if you just look at this form, this is excerpted from the priorities that we have posted both in the council conference room and on the website, the council's website. There's a number of desirable outcomes that you might consider and ways to measure those. And I know that the Housing Committee has been very involved in its work this year, last couple of years actually, and the question is, as we move forward both into this and the next discussion, is are there elements of these outcomes that the council would like to particularly focus on, either directly as a council or through the Housing Committee? So I'll just pass through that for a minute. We've talked about supply of affordable housing, the mix of housing types, reducing pressure on single-family housing, how to distribute and balance housing types within the neighborhoods and around the city, how do we address life cycle housing within neighborhoods, workforce housing, diversification of income within neighborhoods, how do we reduce student turnover at elementary schools, a healthier mix of long and short-term residents, citywide and countywide, distribution of affordable housing throughout the county. And Robert just gave us some indication that they see that as a county-wide effort. And indeed, the state sees it as a statewide effort. How do we help raise incomes in the community? How do we address housing needs using proper data? And then sustainable development, and how do we make it more accessible to things like the UVX, et cetera.
Before you move on to that, as I see those things, I can see several categories that actually can also relate to other of our priorities. Yeah. And I wonder sometimes, are we communicating very well with the, for example, economic development and getting affordable higher income jobs? Are we communicating very well, or is this staying in the affordable housing area and not integrating?
Well, let me give you an example. So when I first arrived about 2.5 years ago, we were all excited about Duncan Aviation coming in at the airport. And Duncan Aviation, as many of you know, just brought in their first jet into their new hangar for work, and their expansion continues. And one of the things that was attractive about Duncan coming was an increase in jobs. Well, how have we made the link, have our policies, have our actions as a city, how have we made the link between that economic development activity and having some of those people actually residing in Provo, rather than, say, living in some of the outlying areas? Have we made links in terms of our programs, our policies, to try and do that? And I think that's exactly what you're asking is, when we do an effort over here, are we also considering the linkages to other areas?
And we have the representation on these committees to interact with those other ones. Like, is there somebody from economic development on the affordable housing committee? Do we need to look at that and review that to make sure that those interests are being discussed?
Okay, that's a good point.
Also
George?
point out, I feel like that's all, everything on that list is important, and I feel like they're all, at least they've been in the mix in terms of our conversations over the last year that I've been involved. The last three seem to be, sorry, I guess it's the last, distribution of affordable housing throughout the county, which we were just talking briefly about with Robert and with the Vision Valley effort and so on. That's pretty crucial. I mean, and that may also be a matter of coordination with multiple entities, because we can focus on what we need to do in the city, but but we also have this constant anxiety that the rest of the county needs to be involved, needs to do their part, that we're not doing more than our share, and so on. The other thing, the second to last bullet point, is assessing housing needs using relevant current data on demographics and market conditions. That has also kind of haunted us perpetually, and it seems relevant to a lot of other committees, that if we have, you know, improved data about who lives here and what they're doing here and so on, I think we're going to be better off across the board. And the last one, just as another editorial comment, is that bleeds into all kinds of other issues, right, in terms of general plan, in terms of planning commission, the new sustainability director, will he be helping us with this? I mean, what is going to be the way that we can ensure that as we make decisions, we're not just making them ad hoc or one at a time, but we're sort of holistically thinking about these planning issues that are pretty crucial to our overall. I mean, it seems like everything we do is future-oriented, right? It magnifies in terms of positive and negative, depending on how careful we are about its future implications.
It's essentially policy making, which is what the legislative body like the council is empowered to do, is all about, generally is both proactive and reactive, right, to the conditions that we either have or want.
So you mentioned bringing in someone from economic development to be on the housing, and then we have Austin, who would also be, because we talk about sustainable development and parking and everything else is so integral. So having someone like Austin on there would be valuable to make sure we're not just, initially we brought together everyone that we could think of that was dealing with affordable housing, but it's bigger than that.
All right, let me move you on, because we have a limited amount of time. So these are things we want to think about, and we asked you to identify some very specific priorities. And so let me just move down to this one for a minute. Zoning compliance. Council member Connect sent us an email and said one of the things that he'd like to see accomplished is for us to figure out finally a permit parking program or some parking program to deal with the issues we have in the Joaquin neighborhood. That would be an identifiable goal that the council could pursue. Under zoning compliance, now remember zoning compliance also back in 2016 put together a strategic plan for zoning compliance, and I believe there's nine policy areas on there for that committee, the zoning compliance committee, to work on. But by way of reminder, the desired outcomes are enhanced enforcement efforts, reducing the financial incentives for violators, and resulting in greater compliance. And just so you know, this is an older version of the draft, and so they cut off, but enhanced regulation enforcement of rental dwelling licenses, leading to greater compliance by landlords. And that is a specific policy that the council and the city adopted and is implemented. And you know how well it will do is still in progress, right? Determining that. Increased regulation enforcement of zoning disclosures leads to decline. That's same issue. Adequate staffing and training of code enforcement personnel. We get back to this idea of budgeting for outcomes or budgeting for priorities. Have we provided enough finance or funding to have an adequate number of code enforcement personnel? Increased communication with and education of residents leading to reduction in violations and better cooperation. Engagement with stakeholders increases awareness. We've certainly done some of that. Clarifying current zoning laws and advancing new ones in a code that is clear and provides the tools the enforcement officers need, and developing a holistic approach to evaluating enforcement solutions in progress. And so I think we've made some effort, some successful forays into accomplishing these things. We need to probably get some more data on how we're doing.
So my response about, I would love to see us finally tackle and do something with the walking and parking permit program. It was not necessarily focusing on zoning. I think it's something that's been long overdue, and it's really related to a variety of issues: the quality of life, the housing that is, some of it's being subsidized by free on-street parking. So even though it has implications with zoning, it's just been something that's been considered, and frankly, it was talked about 50 years ago. It is just long overdue that we address all the issues and come up with something that we can wrap around our arms around it and just make it happen.
Just get back one. Economic development. Now, we don't have a specific council committee for economic development. Pretty much everything that comes from the Economic Development Department for your consideration comes to the council as a whole. Sometimes you're asked as individual groups of council members for some input on things, but we have not had a committee focused on this. But our desired outcomes in economic development has to do with well-being. The growth that we're dealing with, does our workforce have adequate housing? Does it have sufficient incomes? Are there lots of opportunities? Stable, well-paid employment opportunities, retail opportunities, and some of that's starting to improve. When I got here, the council's priorities indicate one of the outcomes was buy a soccer ball in Provo. You can do that now. We've got a Target, which makes a lot of people, Target Express.
Or BYU Target.
Or BYU Target. Makes a lot of people very, very happy. Glad to have them. But that's part of a business attraction and retention and creation. And how are we doing on that? We know we've got some very professional guys down in economic development that are working on that, and in cooperation with the RDA staff. A lot of good work going on. What do we need to do policy-wise as a council to give them the tools to do what they need to do? And then one of the things we haven't done a lot on, and that is expanded relationship management. How are we getting a good sense of how our community feels about the regulation the city has? What are we doing to improve that for the city? And then, of course, all the various performance indicators. Stepping back then to budgeting to priorities or budgeting to outcomes. Again, are we aligning our services with our strategy and priorities? Have we got a dashboard matching our expenditures to outcomes? We've done, for a number of years now, a structurally balanced budget. We're not only are we balancing long-term revenues expenditures, we're not spending one-time money on ongoing activities, which is
Cliff, with that, can I ask the mayor and Wayne, I know that a lot of it, as we started talking about this outcomes and budgeting for outcomes, we were starting to rely on 360 quite a bit. How are we're supposed to be getting close to that now, to the end of that, and where we're dealing with that, where we can get the information, which will help us even more on that.
Yeah, as the various pieces come online, I think we're able to see a lot more and better information there. So with the City View project, we have now much better data on zoning enforcement, for example, and a variety of those kinds of tools. Finance is in shape and working very effectively. We're just now starting the rollout for work management, inventory management, customer service suite. We'll be launching in the spring the new HR tool, which will allow us again to keep better track of employees and performance and so on. So it's coming along. We do certainly have better data than we've had before. We'll, as we start getting into budget for next year, we'll be sharing a lot more of that with you as we progress forward.
So some of the things that you're learning now are going to be implemented into this upcoming budget. Thank you. That's great.
Just wondering, I don't know the details. I was meaning to ask, but for me, a priority, if we need to spend more money to protect the lives of our officers in the field with vests or anything that they need, then that should be one of our priorities.
Yep, we're with you there.
We've done a lot of talking in the last few years about fee structures and our fees and are they appropriate, and we've come up with not necessarily an ongoing tool, but we've got some spreadsheets that we've been using now as we evaluate fees to get a real sense of what the actual fees are. Do they have, are we subsidizing a service or not? Information is power, and once you know whether a fee is relevant to what's being charged or to what it costs, you can make a policy decision whether or not you want to charge the full fee or subsidize it in some way. And that way you can balance out both the actual costs, the legality of matching fees to cost, and ultimately market forces that you have to deal with in all these services that we provide. And then do our budgets reflect the progress and desired outcomes associated with the council's and mayor's priorities and general plan goals.
With fees, you're going to ask when you have the departments come in, give us a quick overview of fees, what they think. Is that part of our process?
What I've suggested in the past, and as I've had conversations with different department heads and things over time, is what I think we should look at is if we propose a fee change, we should be able to justify those fees. Now, whether 3 years ago, council had started a quarterly review of the fees, and we got through most of them, and I think felt very satisfied. We've not done much on that in the last 6 months, but what I've said to our staff is that if the departments are asking for fee increases, we ought to be able to, or changes, we ought to be able to justify that and identify what those actual costs are. And now we have some tools to do that.
That's what I felt more comfortable with the department heads coming in, telling us this is where we think we need to raise fees, this is where we could possibly even lower fees, rather than as a council coming in and saying, why are we, that's too much. We don't know, they know what, they run their business, they run the department. And I'd like to hear from them when they come in. I guess they will be giving us.
Well, and you can balance that, because the reality is the council gets to approve the fees, right? Right. That's your part of your legislative mandate. But having the information of what being able to identify with some clarity what things actually cost, what the market rate is for those services, because a lot of times, as we mentioned back when we were discussing fees more in depth, one of the things we discovered was departments, whether here or elsewhere, would call other cities and say, how much are you charging for it, right? And then they'd peg their costs at that. And then we actually had some where we'd find out that we had some fees that were charged, that we were charging, and well, what does Orem charge? Well, Orem charges this, and you ask Orem what they charge. We just look to see what you guys are charging, right, and adjust it accordingly. But we've got to be very careful with that, and I think it's important. We just wanted to have a tool in terms of an evaluation tool of what those costs are. And then there's, again, back to the policy decision. You may decide that it's not. I mean, we just did a huge effort with impact fees, and most fees that we do don't need to go to that level, not even close. But we learned some things last year, a year and a half ago, when we started looking, say, at some engineering fees to understand how they were, what they were charging for inspections and that.
Which I appreciate you doing. That was significant. So thank you for taking the time to dive in and understand it. I learned a lot.
Well, thank you. It's helpful.
So I don't want to get too down into the details on this one particular thing, but I like the impact fees. It kind of went for a long time without being reviewed, and now we've kind of put it on a schedule that we're going to keep up to date. I almost wonder if a fee review, as directed by the department, but if they're asked every 4 years, and we could stagger them, but once every 4 years, just walk through. And my hope is with 360, and again, I don't want to put too much expectations on it, but with 360, it sounds like that should be a lot easier for them to do. And say, well, how much are we spending on this service? How much are we collecting fees on this? Does it need to be adjusted? And if it's every 4 years, and we stagger them, so different ones are going in different years, then that might be a good thing to keep everything up to date and would not be too burdensome on everybody.
And I think that's what we were waiting for a lot on the 360, to have be able to gather that information.
So besides the various departments that have current needs and future needs, we have our CIP, and we try to plan, at least to some degree, But it seems like lately some of the biggest budget items that we kind of haven't planned for because they're just sprung on us is like, gee, you can't rebuild your wastewater plant to the 1950 standard. It's got to be to this standard. It's going to cost you, you know, $200 million more. Or now we have stormwater and whatever falls from the sky, you've got to deal with it. That's a lot of money. That's kind of this unfunded mandate that they say you have to do it, but they're not necessarily giving us money. They are loaning us money. That's very appreciated.
And $2 million they are giving.
Yes,
so
that's true.
we'll take every dime.
Well, to be, you know, it's a challenge because not only does the city want to be able to do some strategic planning on its long-term needs and costs and that, but then even if you're planning those things, it doesn't stop the EPA or the state DEQ coming down and saying, by the way, you need to up these standards or whatever. But the city itself, I mean, we can only speculate about what's coming down from, say, the federal government. But we certainly ought to be, and I think we were doing a better job now than, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, in putting aside funds to get to where we need to be to meet not only today's needs, but anticipate the future needs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's, I think it's true that we can't know what the price tag is going to be for a lot of these things, but I think we can anticipate, and we should be, actually. I mean, you know, it is our responsibility to worry about what kind of pollutants we're putting into the lake, right? And if we're being informed by the latest understanding about, you know, this has been a growing science, just speaking about the lake itself, in terms of being able to understand what's causing these algae blooms and so on, and what are the effects of all this downwater runoff. But if we're well informed, you know, we could be in a position where we can at least identify certain trends that we're going to want to find some budget for. Right. I mean, another issue is probably air quality that we know is that the governor's thrown out $100 million to do something about air quality. I don't think it's clear yet what that money's going to be used for. But I mean, if we're sort of proactively looking at some of these externalities that are going to cost us some money, then maybe it won't be quite so much of a surprise to us. I mean, obviously we can't control.
Right. But we ought to be able to control the things that we can anticipate. I mean, to some extent, right? We ought to be able to plan for future city halls, plan for
be surprised
for police facilities that have to expand and things as they.
And frankly, speaking a little bit politically, I think to the degree that we're talking about those things publicly in advance of the decision-making process, that makes the public feel like, oh, okay, this wasn't out of the blue. I mean, and it always seems unfair from this end when you know you're wrestling with all this stuff when people say, you guys just like made this decision overnight, and it's like, no, that's not how it happened. But I think to the degree that we're more proactive, more forward-thinking, and public about those conversations about future budget needs, then the city's citizens are going to be less likely to be panicky about where did this come from, you know.
So we had that presentation, and I went out in the hallway and talked to the gal, and I said, so if you're really looking to reduce what we're putting out of our sewage treatment plant, you know, the effect on the environment, so why don't we reduce what we're putting in? Why don't we design homes so that the gray water does not go down the sewer? And that's all of your washing machine, dishwasher, your clothes washer, your showers, just the shaving and whatever goes down your sink. Really, pretty much the only thing that would go in the sewer is what, that 1.5 gallon flush.
Let's talk affordable housing then.
And that actually is, and that's actually where I would go with it, is that all these things is a balancing. You push on one lever. Wayne shared a great example in a staff meeting this morning about how to affect policy and how to affect change within an organization. He talked about gears, and you focus on certain gears, and there's impacts all the way down. Any lever you push is going to have an impact on some other lever.
And the thing is, right now are asked to retain stormwater on site as much as possible, or in the neighborhood, you know, let it percolate into the ground. And for, frankly, it would probably be a cost savings if you had your gray water go into a cistern and percolate into the ground, and any extra that couldn't percolate then went into the sewer. Then if you're cutting your what goes to the sewage treatment plant by 2/3 or 3/4, well, then you're not going to be charged on your bill because it's not going there anymore. So you would have a lower sewer bill, and just that one-time cost of putting in the place for it to percolate into the ground. So that was just what I threw at her. She was like, wow, that's really innovative, and she said they could talk about it, but it really hadn't even been on the radar.
Right. Mr. Harding?
So I kind of wanted to take a step back and we talked a little bit about priorities and all of that. Just received a nice Christmas card from someone at Hanley, along with a little summary of
Making this part of the public record.
I have a point here. Many of us, some of us, at the end of the year, will kind of go back and we'll write a little summary of what their year was like. And at least for myself, when I start, I look at it, and anyway, as I go through, there's things that kind of jump out that I had forgotten that had happened that year. Going through that process, and so I might be forgetting some of those things, but for the council, but in a similar exercise, I think it might be instructive to look back at 2018 and what did we accomplish as a council? What were kind of the highlights of things that we worked on? And just again, I might be missing some things and point them out to me, but we implemented the acknowledgement of disclosure, even though I think that was all resolved, language was all done in 2017, but we actually implemented it in 2018. I actually think that our major home occupations, minor home occupations, revisiting that and reworking the code, I think that was a major effort that had an impact. I think I just forgot one on the fly. Oh well.
You got along as a council.
We got along as a council. but probably the biggest, I would say, is that we proposed, we deliberated, decided, proposed a bond to address our city facility needs, and the voters narrowly but approved that so that we can address these things. So those are some of the big things that I think we accomplished in 2018. If we look at our 5 priorities, they were affordable housing, budgeting to priorities, zoning compliance, economic development, and general plan visioning. And I don't feel like we got much, I don't think we moved, and this isn't a criticism, this is just an evaluation of and I think it's going to affect maybe what we decide for 2019. But I don't think we did much with the general plan visioning. As we explained, it was handed off. But economic development, I think some great things happened, and I think we cooperated, but as far as like IFA, we cooperated, but as far as like council-driven initiatives, zoning compliance, again, we implemented, and I think that that was one of the 3 that I just thought of. But as far as new legislation, or as was pointed out, we had like a list of 15 things, and I think this one addressed 1 or 2 of those. So there's others, and budgeting to priorities. Again, I think we're at a good spot with our budgeting process, but I don't feel like we did much with that. And then affordable housing, we've done a lot of discussing, talking, meeting, and so I think that's moved a little bit. So I guess as we look forward, as we're talking about this now, I just wonder what are some things that we want to accomplish, and maybe it'll be like the bond, where we may not even recognize it right now, but maybe throughout the year, there may be something that raises to the level of, hey, boy, we need to put some focus, some energy, some effort onto that. So anyway, I've been thinking about this a little bit, and maybe if we think about doing it a little bit differently, only having a few things that we're actively working on, and then if it's like the visioning and general plan, and we kind of get it to the next step, and we hand it off to someone, maybe we drop that off, and we stick another project that, maybe it's the home occupations. Not something we talked about in January last year, but something that came up, and then we took care of and addressed. And anyway, so.
Cliff, with that being said, with the things that you're presented here, we appreciate the review here. This is where we're at. This is the things that we're doing. What are you looking for takeaways for us for the next?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I think there's a recognition that Mr. Harding just made is a recognition that no matter what you set out to do, other things come up. We spent a lot of energy on the bond this last year because we had an opportunity to consider, and that took attention away from other things. There is only so many things that we can do. So what we're really asking you to do is think about your committee assignments going forward, what you want to be involved doing. Think about the priorities that you've already identified for this 2-year cycle, and try and identify what it is you want to accomplish. And this is just a little bit of mirth because when my kids were small, we loved watching Phineas and Ferb. But what is it you want to do today, tomorrow, this year, next year, and come back in 2 weeks when we meet again, and let's be prepared to try and identify some actual priorities to work on. Now we know that in the next 6 months, the council and the mayor's office and the finance office and all the departments are going to be very involved planning the budget. And if there's priorities that need funding between now and July 1st, let's identify those and discuss with the mayor's office how important those are and where we'd like to be. But as far as today's assignment really is, think about what it is you want to accomplish, and then please communicate that. And as we move forward into the new year, as now we're in the new year, as we move into the end of January and into February, let's hit the ground running and move forward on those things.
We also have committees that we're working with, and departments that we're attending as liaisons. I think it's important for us to get with them over the next couple of weeks, so that we understand what their priorities are, so that as we come forward in the council and start discussing, they will come in individually, but I think it would be good to have, if your housing committee, they're not going to come in and give us a budget report, or some of these other committees that we've got. If you can talk with the people and talk about their priorities, it might help you focus on some of the things that you can bring back to the council. Dave?
I had a thought on committees related to what Mr. Harding said. With this idea of having committees that are sort of more narrowly focused and focus on specific objectives, I was thinking about the Development Approval Process Review Committee that was formed for a specific purpose. We, I think, accomplished several significant things, but lately we've been more sort of waiting for things to come up. We do have one thing that we've been working on, which is having to do with the gravel pit issue. And so I was thinking, rather than have the Development Approval Process Committee continue on and sort of wait for things to come up, maybe we should disband that and just form a specific committee to wrap up on the gravel pit. And it may only take 1 or 2 more meetings to do that. We've already got a report that's well underway and some ideas that still need to be fleshed out for kind of lessons learned and improvements that could be made. So I was just going to suggest that maybe we consider disbanding the Development Approval Process Review Committee and forming a very specific committee to finish up with the gravel pit review. And Mr. Hanley is, I think, spent more time on this than any of us, so I was going to nominate him to be the chair of that committee if he was interested.
I would like to respond to that and say that even though we're kind of waiting for issues as a committee, there have been some significant issues that just kind of popped up, and it was like Dave Gardner running into
bumps and roadblocks and couldn't figure out with engineering how to make the project at the old jail property work. And it's like, well, then let's get together if we're having some issues in the development process. And so he came into the committee and we all got together, and I think it worked out, Wayne, didn't it? And I don't know, he seemed to be frustrated with all the other options, but that option seemed to be helpful.
I appreciate that, and that's what we're going to be asked to do over the next couple of weeks, is to look at the committees that we're on, the assignments that we've got, see if any of them should be or can be combined. I know that the administration is also doing those types of things, and as we work together, then we can start forming the appropriate committees and assignments.
I think just maybe one quick last comment is that of all the budget, or of all the priorities, economic development, as Cliff pointed out, is the only one where we don't have any formal relationship at all, and I don't know
what we've done in the
precedent
past
for that.
Let me address that.
Okay.
I think one of the things that is such a unique situation where we're bringing in, it's so much relationship rather than things that we can do.
I just feel like our role is very reactive rather than proactive.
And I understand that it's an economic development. It's such a unique thing. It's really hard for a council to be proactive because of all the things that have to go forward before it even can be discussed. George?
I think we just take advantage of the opportunities when they come. That should be a goal. And we did that. We got a medical school. We got a Target. There should be some opportunities with the mall this year that we need to take advantage of. And I think it is somewhat reactive. I think what you do.
I think it becomes a joke.
The administration needs support of the council. That's what I found when I was in administration. And it's really hard for 7 people on the city council to be proactive on economic development. They can actually get in the way. Be a problem more than an assistance. But when something's brought to us, we need to be proactively engaged and then help. And I think we've done that. I think the project economic development. And I think the way it's handled is the way it should be handled, personally.
And we have tried to be a committee as a whole, as a council. We've invited Dixon to come in on a regular basis and give us updates and talk to us about. We work hard on understanding tax increment. There was some feelings about tax increment. Is this something we're ready to give up on because we're there? Or I think that those are the things that we discuss as a council, so that when those opportunities come, we know the tools. We are available for those. So, and I think that's something we need to continue to do. Dave?
Well, I agree with George, and we have given, I think, Dixon and others good direction and encouragement to go out and find opportunities to bring to us. Occasionally, some things may come to you as a council member. I had over in Becky Bogdan's neighborhood, she was working with some outfit looking at developing property by the interchange, and they wanted to do some housing and commercial, but they actually wanted to emphasize housing. They had their own particular spin on what they wanted to do, and so they ended up calling me and they go, so, how can we make this work? And I said, well, if you're asking for something that is not really quite in keeping with the general plan, and you want people to take notice of your proposal, and you say you want some commercial in your project, then if you actually brought a grocery store, people would take notice. So they went out looking, and I don't know if that's going to end up that way. They claimed they had potentially found somebody. But as long as we understand what our needs are, and if the opportunity comes up, I just put it out there. Like, that's one of our biggest things, is grocery store leakage. So, if you bring that, maybe people would take notice, and it seemed to help.
And I think we just stay in touch with the economic development in Dixon and the mayor's office. And I think that's probably, it's just a different animal sometimes, George, than than some of these
Yeah,
other things.
I think I'm content with that. I think the public perception is also an issue here.
It is,
right?
there's no question.
Isn't the city council deciding everything?
Yeah.
What are you guys doing about the mall? And you say, well, we got staff working on that. Well, why aren't you guys doing it? And why are you guys asking us to raise our taxes when you're not?
Because we're legislative, not administrative.
Well, yeah.
That's right.
Cliff, you get the last word.
So I just wanted to share, so, there's a lot of things that the council deals with. Some of the things you deal with, you initiate. A lot of the things that we deal with come from the administration and operations side of the city. Let me just share a partial list of accomplishments for the last year. We had 3 sales tax agreements put in place, numerous code updates. The general plan updated included combining Vision 2030 with the general plan. Progress on the west side neighborhood area plan, because we had the map done. We've improved relationships with Utah County by settling lawsuits, taking ownership of Peaks Ice Arena, and continue to work on those relationships. Fiscal responsibility. Council adopted a $212 million budget. We found $500,000 extra funding to fund the police department. We assisted Duncan Aviation with an RDA Section 108 loan to get their project going. Passage of police, fire, and city facilities bond to shore up future facilities. Zoning enforcement. We did the rental disclosure document approval ordinance. We hired new zoning officers. We worked out some changes with the Miss Provo program. We conducted a wastewater site evaluation and made progress on there. And recently, of course, the loan is in progress. Council reestablished the youth council. We've had a number of improvements in the city. UVX was opened. The KOA campground was purchased. PEG Development announced a big downtown project. The medical school, Rocky Mountain University in East Bay. Regional sports park announcement. Improvements in our communications as a council. We've transitioned to on-base. We've already heard about a lot of the things that's happening with Provo 360. Open City Hall continues to go very well. And then, of course, we've made efforts on affordable housing, as we'll continue discussing, and we'll continue to do some work on that. One of the things that, when you step back and take a look at what you've done, you start to realize how busy, you already know how busy you've been, but you've done a lot. And I think the council should be pleased with that, and never complacent, but pleased with what you've accomplished, and keep working at it.
And lastly, that speaks well to how you've kept us in the loop also. I think I listened to those things. This is not a council, this is a Provo City thing. And I am grateful that we have been able to work together as administration and council so well to accomplish the things that you just mentioned. So
it takes both.
It definitely takes both. The more that I'm involved, the more I see how much other people really do for our city. I mean, we get reports, we hear about things, we give a few advice, but there's so many people that actually have their feet to the fire and actually go out and do these things. And the more I get involved, the more grateful I am for those people. So, thank you, Cliff. Be interested in that list. With you.
We'll refine it and send it out.
Thank you, I appreciate that. We'll take a 5-minute break and see you in a minute.
Mr. Chair, we had a birthday.
Can we do that right at the beginning? I was going to.
Okay.
Did have a birthday last week, and we're going to turn the time to Brian here for
Right, and I got
Bryce?
Councilor.
Oh, you're going to do a duet here together, huh?
Councilor Stewart, yeah.
Bryce, thank you.
Are we ready?
George? Yes.
Oh, somebody's had a birthday, our dear little David dear. May Father in heaven bless him through all the coming year. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear David. Happy birthday to you.
I wish I had the presence of mind to whip out my camera and record that.
You guys organized well.
That was great, thank you.
Time to take it on the road.
We will thank you, and happy birthday, Dave.
Just be sure when you have a birthday, you sit us two together.
Oh, you got that, Elizabeth, very good. Okay, we'll now move to item number 4, a discussion on affordable housing policies. We do have a closed session that has been requested, and so just as you, Cliff, you're conducting this, keep that in mind for us.
Okay, let me add a couple things. As a choir, we're not as good as the duet. And on Sunday, they passed around a choir sign up at church, and I mentioned to my wife afterwards that it never came to our row, and she said, they heard you sing.
Isaac is the choir director too, so we know he can help us with that.
That's right. So good.
My meeting is never off tune.
A couple things. I do want to acknowledge, I probably understated in a previous presentation how powerful the relationship we have with the administration is and the work they do. A lot of what we accomplish as a council and accomplish as a city is because of what the administration, their staff does. The second item is I asked Robert Vernon behind you about the scoring of the MIHR, the Moderate Income Housing Report. Brian Maxfield stopped by during the break and indicated that doesn't have to be scored, that just had to be turned in December. The one that needs to be, that we might want to pre-score is the plan that has to be sent in the end of June. So just clarification on that. Council, we wanted to talk about affordable housing policy. As you recall, sometime in the fall, I think September or so, the Housing Gap Coalition came to the council and many city councils and asked them to adopt a resolution, and the council has wrestled with various aspects of it. There was some concern about whether or not it tied our hands, whether or not it'd be something we get slapped with if we didn't accomplish it all, that kind of thing. We wanted to go over really briefly, with the time we have left, what's in the resolution, what Provo City already has on the books. So the Housing Gap Resolution is all these items, you've seen them before: seek to minimize barriers, review existing practices, plan and allow significant housing opportunities near various centers, increase public and government awareness, and then think and coordinate regionally, align housing infrastructure and economic development efforts, and promote collaboration with other communities, elected officials, and stakeholders. These are things we're doing. And let me also tell you, Council, in terms of that resolution, you have the options to do nothing, to reject the resolution, to revise the resolution, to approve the resolution, to approve a new resolution, to affirm the ULCT resolution, and also to research housing needs, right, and do something on your own. But these are all options, and sometimes initially we thought do nothing and reject the resolution were the same thing, but they're really not. You can just decide to do nothing but on that resolution. The fact is, you as a council, you as administration, the city is doing a lot already. This was the League of Cities and Towns resolution that was adopted at the ULCT convention back in September. Essentially, it falls under a cover of population growth and housing gap. It talks about engaging stakeholders. It talks about expanding the use of accessory dwelling units, reviewing our ordinances, and supporting efforts to inform residents about population growth, because every city that tries to address affordable housing runs into the NIMBY factor. We're happy to have it, we're happy to address it, we're happy to have affordable housing, just not in my neighborhood, right? The second part of their resolution was housing affordability, and they wanted to support federal policies that could ease material and labor costs. They wanted to support state and local efforts to improve wage growth. And then under affordable housing, ULCT committed to examining their current housing stock by complying with HB 259, that was passed last year, and to support state financial support and incentives for inclusionary zoning and other things. We wanted to show you what the Housing Gap Coalition resolution includes versus what Provo has in its general plan. This pledge of support, we as municipal leaders of Provo City pledge to consider housing affordability issues with a regional perspective. This comes from the proposed HCG resolution. It talks about working with other governments, it talks about working towards the goal of housing affordability and recognizing the need to implement smart growth strategies. Provo's general plan includes conduct a comprehensive citywide audit for the various populations. It talks about making quality housing and services are accessible to all segments of the population. And also we have a specific item on affordable housing as one of your council priorities.
When was the last time we did an audit, Chris, on our housing?
I don't know specifically. I know they collect data for the moderate income housing report, so that's part of it, but I don't know how specific an audit they've done and when it's been done, if ever.
So having just the raw numbers and saying we have so much of this and so much of that is kind of like saying, well, I've got 10 of that in the warehouse, but I couldn't tell you where. And I would love to see Provo's map not just layered with things like zoning.
Right.
That's the normal. But where can you find the LIHTC projects? Where can you find the projects that are affordable for someone who's making 80% AMI? So all the things that we say are in the audit, where are they in the picture in Provo? And then when you see where they are, you can say, well, we need more of this here and more of that there. You can have a better feel, kind of like we did on the west side.
Okay. Maybe the council could ask the administration to look at that, funding that in the budget, right? To whatever cost it takes to audit the city on that issue. The second item they had under the proposed resolution was to seek to minimize barriers to the provision of housing opportunities. These are all the items that our current policies allow for or propose under the general plan. Encourage community land trusts and inclusionary housing. Promote low-cost subsidies in the form of reduced impact fees. Now, that has not been decided yet. That would have to be an ordinance change. Some of these will be that way. Encourage home ownership and preservation through neighborhood-based economic assistance programs. Make quality housing and services are accessible to all segments of the policy. Provo encourages the development of market rate housing. Provo will set aside a reasonable and effective minimum of any new commercial residential development for affordable housing. Again, that needs to be some kind of ordinance change. Sufficient supply of affordable housing for people desiring to live in Provo, the housing type they desire. And as Dave Connect pointed out during the break, one way we've done that, in addition to some of the traditional, is the young single adult or young single working folks project that was adopted off of South State Street.
Cliff, and these are the things I think that the council is a little concerned about as we go back to that one particular statement that says seek to reduce barriers.
Yeah.
Well, we also create barriers.
Yes.
And as we create those barriers, I guess I'm concerned that all we're doing here, though, is just, it's advisory. We can still create barriers if we want to, right?
Yes. Yes. I mean, because you think about it, I mean, one of the issues, you know, we have a parking issue, we have a housing affordability issue, and sometimes those are in conflict. How do we address both?
And we did that very definitely with the impact review, impact fees. I mean, we created a barrier to affordable housing.
Well, you created a regulation, and I don't know if it's a barrier, but the reality is that there is an impact to it, right? And you're juggling this idea or balancing this issue of who pays. Provide affordable housing, who's going to pay for the impact on the community. Now, the council hasn't yet considered whether or not, because we referred it to the to the housing committee, this question of, do we want to provide some kind of break for impact fees for affordable housing units? And that committee still has to do some work on that.
It's on the agenda.
On the agenda, yeah.
When does that come?
Next meeting, right?
Next Thursday.
No.
The housing committee next Thursday.
Mr. Van Buren?
Can you back up one slide?
Yeah.
That last statement, sufficient supply of affordable housing for all income levels for people desiring to live in Provo in the housing type they desire. That's the kind of statement that I struggle with. Because that means that everybody that wants to live in Provo should be able to live in the house type that they desire. Is that real?
Well,
I've been building houses for about 40 years, and most of the times in all levels of houses I've built, people want to live in a little more than they can afford.
Right.
Whether it be a $2 million house, whether it be a $110,000 house. And so to put a statement in there like that and say that's what we as a city and as a council support, I just don't understand how I can back that up.
Okay,
I don't understand it, I guess.
This one is part of the council priorities, right? Is how to make that a reality, and you may not be able to, but you can take steps. You can or may be able to take steps that will help create a market or help the market provide some of that.
I think the key word though is housing type. It's not whether you get marble counters in your kitchen or whether you.
Yeah, how do you know that? I mean, you read that statement, that doesn't say that.
Well, it says housing type. So we're talking about if people want to, we need to have.
So you're defining type by single family, apartment,
A variety.
We're just talking about.
But I think if you want variety of housing in the city, you can say that a lot different than.
Right. Keep in mind, this is what we're trying to show you is what the proposed resolution includes and what Provo is already trying to encourage.
So I don't know if I was the author of those words themselves, but I did a lot of that 3 years ago now.
The original draft of that was 2016.
And you know, and we did it quick because we were trying to lay out a lot of information all at the same time, and then we approved it. I think everyone here but George was on the council at that time. I definitely agree that it could be written better. The intent behind that for me is what I was trying to get at, or what I think the thought was is, you know, do we want grocery store clerks to be able to live in our communities? Do we want our teachers to be able to live in our community? Do we want our firefighters to be able to live in our community? Do we want people, you know, kind of across our society to be able to live in Provo? And that may need, you know, and so we need housing types that, you know, maybe they want to live up here or whatever, but with what they can make, with their income potential, what are housing types that fit their needs, housing types and kind of the income. So that's.
Well, I can understand what your intent is, but that's not what that says.
Yeah, it definitely could have
been
written better.
And I'm not questioning your intent or what our intent was, but I'm saying if we've got it somewhere that someone else is going to read and interpret, our intent might not go with it, with the words. And I don't want to misrepresent our intent.
And perhaps that's why these are guiding documents, advisory documents, and so we're not being, other than potentially politically, we're not being held to this, but we are trying to communicate, and I agree. I'd be happy if we want to go back and
I think that the general, and you know, I still think it identifies all income levels and housing types. So we're just talking about the fact that as a city, we have a responsibility to not close out a certain sector of society because we refuse to build that kind of housing, right? And if that's the cottage house or whatever we're calling it, what's the other term? The
tiny home?
No, anyway, the little house.
Pocket neighborhood.
You're
talking about the
carriage
tiny-
house.
the tiny houses?
Carriage house.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we're just saying that you know we need to provide housing for all income levels in the city, and that we need to try to be diverse in the options that are available to people. Because if we're not, then we are potentially closing out sectors of society who are either in a certain demographic because they're elderly and single, or that they're young and single, or that they're a firefighter, etc. I mean, so I think it's just an aspirational commitment to the fact that we're not going to neglect that responsibility.
What I'd ask you to do is not to get tied up on necessarily what's in the current policy or even the resolution. We're trying to show you right now what the housing gap resolution lists as an item and what's already in Provo's policies. So the next item is review existing practices that would negatively impact housing affordability. We're back to the audit. We talked about the impact fees again. This issue of Provo will encourage the development of market rate housing through the community and assess housing needs using data. What we're saying is that Provo's already committed to trying to help accomplish that without necessarily guaranteeing that they will accomplish it. Number 3, plan and seek to allow significant housing opportunities near employment centers, public transportation, and other amenities. So consider amending zoning districts and regulations to encourage higher density uses in proximity to transportation facilities. Discourage higher density development where transportation facilities cannot be developed. Promote more walkability, sustainable development and connectivity to transportation, grocery stores, etc. These are some of the policies that we're already encouraging. 4, increase public and government awareness and understand the housing affordability needs of our city, region, and state. Again, we're back to a need for an audit. Assess housing needs using relevant data. So some of the same things keep coming up. 5, the GAP Coalition wants us to think and coordinate regionally about land use decisions. And then this issue of the general plan says disperse the increase in demand for affordable housing throughout the city and the county. The city's already in trying to encourage that. Initiate actions necessary to encourage other cities to accommodate a share of rental housing market. What was it, Robert Verdon, you said earlier that there's certain things that the city doesn't want to do because we want it outside, right?
I don't remember the draft off the top of my head, but do we have a sentence in there in the draft of the resolution that specifically says we call upon other cities in the county to join in this?
I'm not sure, but let's hold on to that because those pages are coming up.
I think we should.
Distribution
that would be
affordable.
exactly the kind of action that we're
right.
doing to
When
encourage
we
other
pull those
cities.
when we pull those drafts up, let's look for that. Distribution of affordable housing throughout the county. Again, we're trying to encourage those things. Seek to align housing infrastructure and economic development efforts. So we talked about encouraging maximum build out in higher density areas. Establish acceptable service levels for infrastructure. Encourage development patterns that reduce land and development costs. Make quality housing and services that are accessible to all segments of the population. The intent of showing you this was that the city's policies, and then 7, promote collaboration with other communities. As you look through all these, the intent of this little exercise right now was to show you on the housing gap resolution, you're already encouraging those things with your policies. Not everything's been accomplished, not every, for example, the impact fees, we haven't decided to waive them or not. But the council's general plan calls for you to look at all these things. The state is coming along and saying under a new bill, they're proposing several new strategies in addition to strategies that are already in place. Consider whether or not we're already doing this. Create, allow, reduce regulations for accessory dwelling units. allow for housing in commercial mixed-use zones, encourage higher density or MIH near mayor's transit connections. That's actually from the original, by the way. Eliminate and reduce parking requirements in certain areas. Now that one might be in contravention to what we might want to do in some neighborhoods, right? Allow for single resident occupancy developments. Preserve existing, tell me what MIH is, moderate income housing. Consider services provided by a public housing authority, employ incentives for developer to ensure long-term affordability and other strategies. This is what the new state's law is proposing that we do, that we add these things into our code to allow these things to happen. Now, what they're saying is, we're only asking cities to do 2 more. What I don't know is, are they asking cities to do 2 more from the list that we don't already do, or just 2 more from that list? In which case, we're probably already doing our part. So the resolution, these are some of the changes that you council members had proposed. Pledge of support. We as municipal leaders of Provo City pledge to consider housing affordability issues with a regional perspective, that together with other Utah local governments and community stakeholders, in other words, we're calling upon the others, right? Provo City will work toward the goal of housing affordability for all Utah residents. We recognize our ability to implement various smart growth strategies to promote and maintain housing affordability. Section 2, measures to be taken. Within the context of worthwhile goals and purposes, the city pledges to seek to minimize barriers to the provision of all housing opportunities for all incomes and life stages. The angle's tough. Review existing practices that would negatively impact housing affordability. Plan and seek to allow significant housing opportunities near employment centers, etc. Increase public and government awareness and understanding of the housing affordability needs. Think and coordinate regionally about local and land use decisions. Seek to align housing infrastructure and economic development efforts, and promote collaboration with other communities, elected officials, and stakeholders on additional solutions. These are the amendments that council members have previously proposed to this resolution. Mr. Stewart.
Word to chief. Any resolution that I'm going to vote for should include a document produced by Utah Regional Housing Authority which shows affordable housing in Utah County. 29 of 47 projects, 61.7% are 1,093 of the 1,870 units, 58.4% are in Provo. Utah cities, please do likewise. In other words, we do so much now, and when you adopt these resolutions, it sounds like we're not doing what we.
And that's what I want to point out is.
I want this in there. I could vote for a resolution and add that in there.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. This is what, and so that's why I'm saying, when you look at this whole thing, whatever you do with this resolution, you're already doing it. You're already doing what it calls for, and indeed, roughly 60% of all affordable housing is from Utah County is within Provo.
So if we do a resolution and we include the numbers, in fact, we include the report saying this is what's called for and this is what we're doing, folks. You know, put it out there so anyone can say, what is Provo doing? It's right here.
Yeah.
And I would to underscore that point, rather than just make it look like we're copying a template resolution, we can stay consistent with our general plan that we have been working on. These are the I don't know, whatever the language is there, the measures that we are currently using. I mean, we're not committing to anything new. We're just publicly stating what we've been doing in harmony with what needs to be done. And then if we identify that we're not only are we doing it, but here's the proof in the pudding that we've got 61% affordable housing in the county. You know, we will continue to do these things, and we call upon other cities to join us in this important regional effort. It's a regional problem, and we've got language in our own general plan that acknowledges that this is a regional problem. This is not something we can do alone, and that we have to be coordinating with other people. But if other people are not cooperating, then that's that makes our own goals hard to achieve, right? So this is why I think if we do this right, I think it actually is consistent with our own effort to try to, I mean, we are a leader, and I think this document can be a kind of voice of leadership to say, you know, we recognize the problem, the statewide problem. We have been serious about this for some time. These are the measures we've been using that are consistent with our general plan, and we call upon other cities to do the same.
I love what George said about, I'd love to see a resolution, and I think that we should be tooting our own horn with this, because we have been carrying the water for so many years. And I think this is an opportunity for us to show how conscious we are of this problem. And so I agree with George. With that type of wording in a resolution, I think that would make that resolution even more powerful. It's putting our money where our mouth is.
I want to say this carefully. As we're drafting this, and I'm glad that I like the momentum that we have on this. Let's be a little careful that we do it with statesmanship and a little bit diplomatically. You know, if tooting our own horn in such a way that causes others to look at that, and we could possibly drive away support. I think we just need to be thoughtful on how we do it, so it is encouraging others. They don't read it and say, well, okay, good for them. We'll just anyway. I just think.
No, I think you're saying is make sure the tone is right.
Make sure the tone is right. Very good. Thank you for saying it how I should have said it. Let's just make sure that the tone is right. I think we can say, like, hey, we agree this is a problem. We're committed to doing these things, and here's how we've been doing it and how we will continue to do it.
You could actually build that kind of statement that George's are talking about into the whereases. You know, here we're already doing this, whereas we're doing this.
So the one significant change that you didn't kind of go over, but was early on in the process, is we dropped out the word that we would ensure like affordable housing for everybody. And to me, there you go. Yeah, committed to ensuring, sorry. And when you insure, you promise, you guarantee, and nobody's really in that position. Without a printing press and central planning and you know, taking over property rights. I mean, so we will do just what it says. We'll work towards the goals, which we have been, and we will continue to do that.
The whereas tells you we really have been working on it.
Yes. Yeah.
It really shows that it's going to be difficult to criticize what Provo is doing and has done, which has been my worry. If they use this resolution against us, or if we already show that we're doing something and we've been consistently doing something and it's consistent with our general plan, then I think I could support it.
I'm curious if we could ask Robert to comment on whether you think this would be useful. Assuming we worded it in
I've been to all the Housing Gap Coalition meetings. Very aware of what they're doing. I like the fact that you neutered it. Just as a point of reference, the Housing Gap Coalition is being funded by Clark Ivory. And so there are developers behind this trying to figure out another market income stream, whatever. They're trying to figure out how to get down into the more affordable range. And so I think that's the impetus behind this. But I mean, I think it's definitely worth doing. I like the way you've rewritten it, because you are doing a lot of these things, and it just says that you're working on them, and you can prove you have been working on them.
Would that be helpful in your efforts as you go around the region, for the valley anyway? And I mean, you already represent Provo, and you can already say what Provo's doing, but I mean, would a document like this have a kind of functional utility to show to people?
I think it does, and I don't know where the other cities are in adopting this resolution or working on it, but Yeah, if they could see what Provo's done and kind of if everybody kind of, got on the same page. I mean, that's what that's what the language in here says, that this should be a countywide. That's what the land trust is about. That we all need to work on this solution together. It's got to be a countywide solution. So, I like the resolution. I like some of the changes you've made to it as well. So.
Would you like then, council, for us to redraft this with some proposed changes and then circulate it for your consideration again? Okay. And then when you're satisfied, we'll put it on an agenda. Okay. Mr. Sewell?
Just point of clarification. So are you proposing that we would leave the text the same and that the changes would be in the whereas clauses, or?
Let us work on that, and we'll figure out how to incorporate it in a way that is tonally appropriate and at the same time putting the information in that you want. Because just off the top of my head right now, I think this is the enactment part, not the whereases, and so we can play with it. I haven't got the rest of the language in my head at the moment. There's a draft of it, I just don't remember what everything it says. What?
You pull it up?
Oh, then pull it up, yeah. If we're that close, we could clean it up and have it to you at the next meeting, 2 weeks.
So Cliff, I really appreciate that, 38-page document, very thorough, with references, and it gave all the options, like if you do nothing, this is the consequence, and I really think it's positive that we do something and we do it the right way. It's much better than doing nothing.
That was a really well done job. Bryce and Hannah did the majority of the work. My involvement was merely to provide editorial comment.
This is about the second or third report that they've done that's been just very helpful.
We have great policy analysts, we have great staff. So, you got it? So what I would propose then in here is somewhere in the whereas we'll refine this a little bit, but to add that information that George proposed, and then circulate it to you. And I would hesitate to make too many more changes, but I think you've got the gist of what you want, and
I do what George said, that what we're doing is consistent with the general plan.
Yeah, I've got 3 notes in here. Add something to this effect to our resolution, the information on the numbers, the 58% information, and that the work we're doing is consistent with our general plan, and then call other cities in the state in the county and the state to do more.
And I don't know how appropriate this is, but maybe we put those things as an addendum to the resolution, the list of all those things that you had there.
Right. Could be an addendum.
I'd like those numbers in the resolution.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, he's talking, I think Gary's talking about the other things I had up, the general plan.
The numbers are good, they're critical. But I still think that we're doing a lot, and I think this as we approve this, or if we approve this, that we recognize, yes, this is not already, it can't be a weapon for us.
Right. Let us refine it, and we'll bring it back to you. I think you're largely there. Just we'll clean up and figure out how to make that work. Whether or not to put, I don't know if we want to. I don't know if I would suggest that we put in an appendix with all the general plan stuff, but those are things that, in a cover letter to other cities or whatever, we could just simply say that there are lots of examples they could consider. So with that, we're roughly 25 minutes early now, and you do have a closed meeting scheduled for about an hour.
So in that report, Bryce, it seemed like you reached out to other communities, and a couple of them said, hey, we want to work together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. There were several that said that. And they said that they'd like to know what we're doing, and if we can collaborate in any way, they'd like to know what they can do.
I was curious if that was a question that you, like, part of your whole script, like, are you willing to work with Provo? Because, yeah, a whole number of them, you commented that they were interested in what we're doing and were very open to collaboration.
It was not something that we said, we just, it was more like, it was offered as kind of a concluding piece most of the time.
So if they offered without being asked, that says something.
Yeah.
Mayor, there was something that was really interesting that you commented on in our earlier presentation. You're getting a feel that housing affordability is a #1 thing for the state?
I think it's going to be in the top. I've just been at my ULCT leadership meetings, board meetings, and it looks like it's definitely going to be one of the top, I'd say top 3 hot topics this year. There's a lot of talk going on about it.
And I think ULCT will want us to pay attention to, and there definitely are, is anytime the state, the state has a habit of imposing this on us from above rather than considering what our local needs are. So I think we have to be protected by our level of government in making these changes.
Did we want to, in any part of this, reiterate and let people know that we support the Utah League of Cities and Towns resolution also?
That's another resolution that I'm worried, I mean, now that only gives us this one, but if we're saying we support that, that means we gotta study that one too.
Well, no, we already did support it, right?
Yeah, it was unanimously adopted at the convention.
At the convention, but it's a different thing when Provo City itself adopts that, in my mind. We adopted it for the City League of Cities and Towns. We didn't adopt it for Provo City.
Well, okay, so do we?
Bryce, can you bring up that last?
Which one?
Can you bring up my presentation again?
Yeah, maybe that's a bridge too far, but I think it is actually less than what we're saying here.
If it is, I don't know. I just haven't studied that one as much. I remember we adopted it at a ULTC meeting.
Perhaps it can be circulated again. I mean, it's in the report. It's in that 34-page report, but perhaps it could be circulated again just while we're waiting for it to be revised. We heard from a wise person earlier that said cities that don't seriously get on board with addressing housing affordability will be penalized. And that's the vibes that I'm getting from the ULCT meetings as well. And so, again, it's one of those things that I think we're already either doing or committed to considering all of these things. This is written in a more city-friendly, non-binding verbiage, and so I think maybe if we take a little time to look over it and just see if there's anything we have concerns about. Otherwise, I think it only helps to say, to draw the line in the sand and say, yes, we're serious about this. And so I think it would be positive as well.
I think Provo only gets in trouble, frankly, if you stop doing these things. Right? You're already doing the vast majority of them. I think you only get into trouble in this situation if you stop doing these. You certainly haven't been erecting barriers. I mean, yes, we've adjusted the impact fees, and yes, we're looking at some parking issues, but you haven't been erecting barriers to the development of affordable housing.
I think you get in trouble when you promise what you can't deliver. But we're saying we are doing a lot, and we're going to let you know what we're doing. But frankly, considering what is done out there outside of Provo, the bar is pretty low in other communities because they're doing in some places virtually nothing. And it's just a way to hopefully bring attention to the fact that this is everyone's problem. Affordable housing needs to be in every community, not just certain communities.
I know there's cities in the state that have, in their policies have actively kicked the can down the road in terms of affordable housing. That's now, part of that's the reason why I think it's being forced upon them now is because they said, yeah, okay, we've got 15 years to do it, we'll deal with it in 10, right? We've been dealing with it all along.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess the question is, should we convene the closed session right now. Are we prepared for that? Should we do that right now? Or should we wait until 4:30? Should we do it in conjunction with?
There's just one item, is that right?
We have two.
Oh, okay. So I know one that's pending litigation, I don't know about the other one.
The other one
The other
is
is property
potential
acquisition.
Okay. It looks, I'm guessing that both people are here that need to be. So I think it's appropriate if you're ready.
Well, if that's the case, let's.
You can move out of this meeting to the other, but not actually start the other one until 4:30 if you don't like.
I think if we're ready to start, let's start.
Okay.
Well, I think, I would say at this point, make the motion and then call the meeting to order when you're ready to call it to order. Let's get down there.
Okay. So, thank you, George. Do we have a second? Second. Neither, Dave. We're good. Those in favor? Okay, we will reconvene in the council conference room for